And we're live. Hello, everybody. How's it going?
Well, I'm
As
still sharing the video around. That's why it took me for a second to respond.
oh,
I'm doing pretty good. And oh shit, I just got a notification on my phone, so my music player is probably gonna start again.
all
All
right.
right,
So I think.
no, it didn't. Never mind.
All right. So what we're going to be doing today is something a bit different. Someone's been sharing around the video called "The Story of Stuff" by some very long, artistically named foundation. The video is actually pretty ancient. It was posted on the YouTube channel in 2009 and has since been shared around and viewed over 6 million times and is usually featured in government schools, shared around by teachers who are trying to indoctrinate students who are required to be there under truancy laws. I'm
Six
sorry.
million. Is that a Holocaust joke, filthy?
No, actually,
You
it
know, with
actually
these new COPPA regulations, you can't do that.
fair enough. Okay, so 7 bazillion.
All right. But yeah, so a lot of people have been asking us to respond to this video. It's basically anti-market propaganda at its finest. But what makes it stand out is that despite how categorically false, even to mainstream econ, a lot of the arguments being proposed in this video are, and how absurd it is. It's being taught in schools to this day. You can still, underneath the video, you can see comments from people like a couple weeks ago saying, like if you're only here because you were assigned this as a homework project. And I think that's it's disturbing, but it's not surprising because governments uh, are well known for institutionalizing pseudoscience.
Very much so. Suffice, I remember actually, this is actually kind of nostalgic for me since I've been politically active for, I don't know, 11 years now. And I remember when this was first coming out. I remember when this was popular. I was actually in a economics class when some girl who I knew, even at the time, to be a total libtard, decided to share it. I had not seen the video before, so I had no idea what it was going to be about. But like 1 minute in, at least when she started talking and they got past that long ass intro, that this was absolute bullcrap,
Get wrecked, libtard.
pretty much. And yeah, I think I managed to save the that class by having that completely shut down. That was a very interesting day to say the least. So, anyways, we have everything all queued up. I just need to start screen sharing.
Yeah,
So, give me a minute
stuff like
here.
this. Stuff like this is why, in hindsight, I think that the fact that I skipped most of my classes in middle school and high school, and I faked being sick to get out of a lot of elementary school, that worked in my favor in the end because it means that I wasn't nearly as indoctrinated as other people.
Probably managed to make it out better than I did. So, yeah, it looks like the screen sharing is working. So, let me see here. Can I get the live stream chat? SO, can you keep an eye on the live stream chat since I can't see it? Yeah, I'm going to start playing it and let me know if it's picking up audio. I sincerely hope it is. All right, everyone ready? Hello?
Yeah, I'm ready. I
All
was
right.
just trying to hear if it was
All right.
playing, and on my end, it's not playing.
Well,
Too.
it's not playing. I'm going to start playing it now.
Okay. And
Are you clicking?
okay, it's still not playing on my end.
People,
Oh, this is classic like elevator music. So
Yes.
bad. I hate how
I'm just
uh,
gonna pause it real quick.
I hate how shit in like school or in like training for always has like, just on a side note, this really fucking like porn sounding stock music. It's off-putting, and it just, to me, that makes me not want to take it seriously, because it shows they haven't put a whole lot of thought into, at the very least, the entertainment value, and part of it is supposed to be edutainment. I mean, that's not really taking anything away from their arguments, I guess, but I mean, that's the laziness of the government for you.
Hmm. And one other thing, I don't know if people caught that, but can someone in the chat check to see if, or can SO, can you check to see if people in chat have said if they can hear the audio or not from the
uh,
video?
I'm not seeing anyone talk about the audio either way. Can you guys? Well, it's paused now, so obviously they can't. But I don't know. We'll play it again and see if you can.
All right, so I'm just going to start over from the intro because there is one other thing I noticed that is worth remarking upon. Tides Foundation, right up here at the top. You know who that is?
No, please let us know.
George Soros.
All right. Yeah, just
That's
to clarify, I did know it. I did know it. Was just I was asking for the sake of the chat.
yeah. But suffice to say, like the reason that this took off, that it became as prominently featured as it is in government schools today, is because, well, this was not something that some people made grassroots. This was funded by a hedge fund billionaire who made his money collapsing currencies and betting against them. I don't
Yeah, so,
know,
somebody who has essentially the same status in the political sphere as the Rothschilds.
pretty much. But anyways, I'm going to play it again to 20 seconds and chat. Let us know if you can hear the audio fine or if it's quiet because there is elevator music playing.
This music's hot.
Oh, I can totally see myself rocking out to this.
Do you one of these? I got a little obsessed with mine. In fact, I got a little obsessed with all my stuff.
I'm just pausing real quick. Chat, can you guys hear it just fine?
Yeah, they said that it's fine
Okay,
earlier.
okay, fine. That's perfect. They were just very concerned about that. So I'm going to full screen it and
By the way,
I,
I just want to point out very quickly, I love how like the sort of that iPod in this video actually undermines one of the arguments which they attempt to make later in the video. So keep. It seems like something that's not important, and at the time when this came out, it probably wouldn't have been. But in hindsight, it actually works against one of the main points which they're attempting to make in this video about uh, resources and consumption.
all right, now I'm going to play. E.
And now we can't hear it.
That's because I'm playing it and it stops suddenly. Are you clicking?
I haven't opened the tab, so no, I'm not.
I don't know why it's doing that then. I guess I
It's
can't full
because
screen
the
it.
site's awful. That's why.
Probably. All right, so I'm just going to do this then. No full screen.
Have you ever wondered where all this
There we
crap
go.
comes from and where it goes when we throw it out? I couldn't stop.
Can you plug in your headphones? I can hear it on your end.
Or I could just mute myself when you play it.
All right. Anyways, I'm playing it now. No, you didn't.
missing from
Now people are saying there's no audio. Okay. Yeah, now we probably ought to go back, and I don't think that I'm going to mute myself this time because I think that was the only way people could even hear it in the first place.
Huh. All right, so playing again.
Do you have one of these? I got a little obsessed with mine. In fact, I got a little obsessed with all my stuff. Have you ever wondered where all the stuff we buy comes from and where it goes when we throw it out? I couldn't stop wondering about that, so I looked it up. And what the textbook said is that stuff moves through a system from extraction to production to distribution to consumption to disposal. All together, it's called the materials economy. Well, I looked into it a little bit more. In fact, I spent 10 years traveling the world, tracking where our stuff comes from and where it goes.
I bet you didn't.
That is not the whole story. There is a lot missing from this explanation. For one thing, this system looks like it's fine. No problem. But the truth is, it's a system in crisis. And the reason it's a system in crisis is it's a linear system and we live on a finite planet. And you cannot run a linear system on a finite planet indefinitely. Every step along the way, this system is interacting with the real world. In real life, it's not happening on a blank white page. It's interacting with societies, cultures, economies, the environment. And all along the way, it's bumping up against limits. Limits.
Is she trying to appeal to Malthusianism here?
Yes, she is. In fact,
That's why
she actually, later on in the video, she actually explicitly makes an argument for population control. Well, she mentions that as a possible solution, which, as we've mentioned before on the channel, look up the Julian Simon Paul Ehrlich wager. This idea of a Malthusian catastrophe was completely refuted back in the early 90s, late 80s. But just what I was going to say is this is actually kind of like, this is the very point which future technology now undermines, which I love just because it's something that there's no way they could have taken into consideration when making this. But
yes, there is actually.
Well,
there is
yeah,
precedent.
they
Like
could
significant amounts of it.
They could have known about economics, or they could have understood that 10 years in the future, there's not a finite amount of resources which are going to go away. Things are going to improve. They're going to become more efficient, and it's going to require less to use more. And there's going to be substitution. So this model is completely undermined, and it's self-evidently undermined with just introducing that iPod Nano, like 2008 edition, into the video.
What she's trying to do is get us to believe that this whole supply chain system is completely static, that it never changes ever, and it has been this way for decades, if not centuries. However, what constitutes as resources at first is constantly changing. I mean, the gasoline you put into your car, early on, like in the Industrial Revolution, gasoline was a waste product. It was technological innovation that allowed what was essentially a byproduct of oil refinery or oil refining to become a usable, consumable fuel. To say nothing of all the new technologies and ways that we can use technology that previously didn't exist before. Any things that might be considered pollutants now could end up becoming incredibly useful tools and even valuable resources coming into the future. So this whole thing, like technological innovation, as you were talking about before, completely undermines their own premise.
Right. And another thing that I was going to note on that is that there are different kinds of resources, and industries will use different resources as competition within those markets. And a big part of the reason why that isn't really prominent in the political economy, which appears to be what she's describing based on the fact that to represent her model, she's using a supermarket, a factory, and warehouses for her examples. But yeah, a big part of the reason why this model does appear linear, so to speak, is because of the state manipulating um, finance lending through usury laws or loaning laws, loaning restrictions. I mean, and that's not even mentioning regulatory capture, licensing laws, patents, all these sort of monopoly privileges created by the LLC status. Like the list could go on, but the point that I'm driving at is the idea that just the market itself would be this sort of static model is not realistic, and a big part of the reason why it's not is because of the state.
All right, so let's keep going.
We don't see here, the diagram is incomplete. So let's go back through. Let's fill in some of the blanks and see what's missing. Well, one of the most important things that's missing is people. Yes, people. People live and work all along this system. And some people in the system matter a little more than others. Some have a little more say. Who are they? Well, let's start with the government. Now, my friends tell me I should use a
confirmation that she's referring to the political economy and not market exchanges in general, as she's attempting to conflate her argument with.
For the people, you gotta love the propaganda just right off the bat. The belief that the government somehow works in our interest, that it's to the benefit of us, and that they care about what we think, even though empirically we can tell that this is not the case. Hell, you don't even need empirical evidence. You can just observe this in your own life.
You can observe this logically in how governments are structured. There is a very clear disincentive associated with having the interests of people who are not members of the state established. It's also not even technically possible because conflicting interests ensure compiled onto the fact that resources are scarce, ensure that there's no such thing as a general good which can be met by any organization.
Mm-hmm. Now let's keep going.
Bank to symbolize the government, and that's true in many countries and increasingly in our own. After all, more than 50% of our federal tax money is now going to the military.
Now, I know this to be an outright lie because I remember discussing it with other people at the time. 50% of discretionary spending goes to the military, and this is in 2009, by the way. I'm pretty sure it's a little more than that now, but 50% of discretionary spending, which only makes up 33% of the federal budget, the other 66% being non-discretionary spending for things like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And for those of you who don't know the difference, non-discretionary spending refers to spending that takes place without authorization from Congress. The discretionary spending, yeah, they need an annual authorization every year, or at least they should need an annual authorization every year, even though in practice they just put forward a continuing resolutions outward into infinity. But when you take all that into account, the actual military uses about 20-ish% of the U.S. Federal budget. So this is just completely false.
I mean, I will give her this, though, that a tank would probably be a better representation of the government, considering that a necessary consequence of a coercive monopoly on security is wars, constant wars.
Very much so. I mean, these organizations, like any bureaucracy, their incentive is to increase their budget, and what better way to increase their budget than to improve the perception of their necessity? So, ready to play?
Yeah, sure.
But I'm using a person to symbolize the government because I hold true to the vision and values. The government should be of the people, by the people, for the people. It's the government.
I know what she's trying to do. She's trying to come off as patriotic so that in order to manipulate people who would otherwise disagree with George Soros, that make them think like, oh, she's on our side. She's friendly. She's the.
Government for the people. That's why it needs to be forcibly imposed onto people.
Yeah, you remember that? You remember that time you came to my house and pointed a gun to my head and said that we need to stream together?
That was a fun time.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Job to watch out for us, to take care of us. That's their job. Then along came the corporation. Now, the reason the corporation
Here
looks
we
bigger
go.
than the government is that the corporation is bigger than the government. Of the 100 largest economies on Earth now, 51 are corporations.
Oh boy, this is where things are going to start to get fun. And they want us to completely forget, they're going to want us to completely forget that corporation is a legal entity created by the state for the purposes of giving select firms special privileges over others.
And increasing revenue for the state. That's the main benefit which the state gets out of corporations. With fewer ways that people can associate in the political economy, it means that it's easier to collect revenue while spending fewer resources for the government. So yes, naturally, the government would seek to create corporations, but I mean, this is a classic controlled opposition narrative. Corporations are more powerful than the government. No, they're fucking not. If it wasn't for the government, they wouldn't even exist. And nor would the firms which have corporate status. They wouldn't even remotely have the amount of resources which they do because of diseconomy of scale. They'd collapse in on themselves if they even tried. If they even got half the size that a lot of these corporations are. So and then on top of that, there's just the fact that the power dynamic is clearly going in one direction between the government and corporations. If the governments actually perceived corporations, the heads of corporations, to be a threat to the government, they would line them up against the wall and shoot them. And we know that because they've done that before.
Several times. I mean, what do you think the Holocaust was?
And yeah,
one other thing I wanted to point out is this actually might be this counter of like the 100 largest economies. Does the government part count like municipality governments like the state of California, which, if I recall correctly, is the 7th largest economy in the world?
Yes, it does. That's another thing with this figure here, is that it counts a lot of the municipalities as corporations.
Oh God, that's terrible. And I do have to wonder, this is probably going to be relevant a little later to the point I want to make a little later, but of the 100 largest economy, what percent should be governments and what percent should be corporations? I mean, I would just like to get some clarification on why we should why it should be more governments being larger than corporations or vice versa. Should it be 70-30? Should it be 29? I don't freaking know.
Somebody else just pointed out as well in the chat that the state defines itself as a corporation.
That is absolutely correct. Yes, they do.
Yeah.
So technically, it would be 151. 100% of governments and 51% of corporations. Oh God, this is just. Where do we? I mean, we already started, so yeah.
Imagine somebody said in chat, imagine a government controlled by Burger King. Well, I imagine it wouldn't be too different from the United States government.
Honestly, that sounds not bad. I mean, I have to admit, like I find their chicken fries absolutely delicious. But
I'm conflicted because it's a government, but at the same time, chicken fries are great.
yes. But anyways, I'm gonna keep going.
And as the corporation has grown in size and power, we've seen a little change in the government, where they're a little more concerned in making sure everything's working out for those guys than for us.
I love the way that this is framed and that there's a kind of adversarial relationship between corporations and the government. And this is very much the kind of political paradigm that George Soros and other state controlled narratives wanted to create, where you create the people who are, oh, we're for the people, we're going to fight back against the corporations. And therefore, in order to fight against these, what they're known as liberals, you create the vulgar libertarians and just general conservatards and boomer conservatives and just like establishment Republicans, whatever you want to call them, that are going to try to frame themselves in favor of big corporations to defend the free markets, of course, conflating free markets with conflating free markets with corporatism.
And protectionism or legal privileges for corporations. But another thing that I was going to add to this is these sort of these welfare policies. The only difference between them is how they're advertised. The fact of the matter is that they do actually, regardless of what they are, like these welfare policies for unemployed workers actually work as an indirect subsidy to corporations, because it allows them to associate less time into managing the marginal product of each worker, and it creates a stronger incentive to discriminate against people lower on the employment chain.
Now, one other thing I've noticed that I think is interesting is that if the government exists of and by and for the people, and they're shining the shoes of this ballooned, I don't know what the hell you call it, if they're shining the shoes of the big evil corporations, then doesn't that mean that the corporation, that working to the benefit of corporations is in the interest of the people? Isn't that how they're accidentally framing this?
But the government works for us and the corporations aren't us. Don't question statist logic.
Oh, right. I should know better by now. But I just want to remark that by this point, like I mentioned that this was shown in a economics class, and I spoke up and had this like shut down. Yeah, this is the part of the video where I'm just like, yeah, okay, enough. But anyways, yeah, let's keep going.
Okay, so let's see what else is missing from this picture. We'll start with extraction, which is a fancy word for natural resource exploitation, which is a fancy word.
Exploitation.
Exploitation is a meaningless term that's completely in the eye of the beholder. If it's meant to imply that there's a kind of parasitism going on where one group is gaining a great benefit at the expense of another. However, if that were completely, this would only be true in the sense that there is a third party that forces the other party to participate in a relationship that they otherwise would not voluntarily engage in. Gee, I wonder what kind of third party forces people to associate with people that they don't want to associate with. It's a mystery. So, do you have any ideas what kind of coercive monopoly on arbitration will be responsible?
Nope, I have absolutely none. But something I was going to add to this is this isn't necessarily related to the video, but I do think it is kind of interesting. Is that I was having a discussion the other day about obscure arguments in response to the Marxist surplus value claim, and this reminds me of something I brought up, which is that even if the labor theory value was legitimate, you really couldn't call the surplus that's extracted, even assuming that that is logically a conclusion from the existence of the labor theory of value, which it's not. Um, it's not an exploitative relationship, because the reason that the association is even happening in the first place is because there's two parties seeking mutual benefit. So it doesn't work, even assuming their arguments true. The premise is true.
Which, of course, it's not. Then, anyways, let's see how she talks about resource exploitation. Which, how do you exploit a resource except by using it?
Somebody's talking about a government ran by Disney. The closest thing to hell I can think of.
I can one up you on that, actually. A government run by EA.
Somebody else said that in the chat, and yeah, that'd be pretty bad too.
A government run by Activision. That would be absolutely horrendous. But anyways, let's keep going.
For trashing the planet. What this looks like is we chop down the trees, we blow up mountains to get the metals inside, we use up all the water, and we wipe out the animals.
Good fucking lord. No, that's not how that works.
This person claims to have traveled the world for 10 years.
And they don't
be doing research, and they don't know how logging, mining, damming works.
Yeah, they don't know that 86% of all trees planted are planted by logging companies, and that's because they have a direct incentive to do so, because if they don't, then there aren't going to be any more trees to cut down, and that would kill their business.
Weird. It's almost like the depletion of natural resources that these companies rely upon in order to get any product at all to be able to sell it. It's almost like their complete depletion would not be in their interest. Huh.
Yeah, and you
Strange.
look at what's going on in the Amazon rainforest. Well, the thing with that is that the Amazon rainforest is mostly nationalized. So, it seems like the only areas where you are having problems with logging companies are areas where the land is nationalized.
Perhaps there's such a thing as the tragedy of the commons, where when you don't have a single owner owning a single resource that it's in everybody's incentive to make use of? Weird. Huh. We'll have to consider that. And I backed up a little bit because I think we kind of lost our place, but yeah, we'll be fine.
Well,
as
for mining, well, for one thing, there's substitution, so that's not really an issue. For pollution, again, for sort of the exact same reason, people who are polluting rivers, who are doing things with rivers, don't have an interest in polluting rivers. And they also couldn't get away with polluting rivers if the rivers were privately owned, because, hey, you're polluting someone else's property.
The places where the rivers are most polluted are places where the waterways are government owned. Isn't it like India? Like, doesn't the government of India own the rivers? And
Yeah.
they're not only absolutely polluted, but you can find bodies in there.
Yeah, and they're used as basically just a disposal of everything. Sewage, corpse removal, everything that a river shouldn't be used for.
If I recall correctly, the corpse disposal thing is actually a funerary rite in their culture, but it sucks for the people downstream who get to see a rotting corpse floating down.
Yeah, and another thing that she brought up, which we haven't addressed, is the extinction of animals. Now that brings us back to sort of one of the very first topics we actually covered on this podcast, which is the fact that there are gray and black market traders breeding animals and bringing endangered species populations up in pursuit of their own gains. So in reality, it's actually a lot of these government quote unquote conservation efforts which are leading to the extinction of some of these species. That's assuming that the extinction isn't natural. I'm sure a lot of these species of animals would have lived quite a bit longer had it not been for the state.
Most likely.
I mean, don't tell me that the population of red pandas being 10,000 is just because that's the way things are. Don't Can you point to me one person who wouldn't want a red panda pet?
Yes. And they're incredibly, incredibly uncultured. You know who you are.
Red
Anyways,
pandas are they should be the symbol of agorism. We're making red pandas mainstream.
oh boy. Alright, so I'm gonna start playing.
Planet. What this looks like is we chop down the trees, we blow up mountains to get the metals inside, we use up all the water, and we wipe out the animals. So here we are running up against our first limit. We are running out of resources.
Are you fucking kidding me?
We just talked about that. We create new resources. We make more efficient use of our existing resources.
No, that's not what I'm referring to. This is something that kids are being shown in school, and it's not even taking into consideration the law of supply and demand.
Well, supply and demand is scary.
Because that's literally what they're arguing. People are just going to consume all these resources at a continual rate until they're gone. No, as resources become more scarce and as environmental conditions change, they're going to be valued differently because they're harder to obtain. They have sort of a different status in society. Like, this is sort of what I'm talking about when I mean they're pushing pseudoscience. That is a basic concept. And the fact that kids are being essentially brainwashed into believing the antithesis of this is it's scary, but again, it's not to be unexpected.
Now, this was we didn't get this far obviously in my economics class, but I want to remind you, someone was trying to show this to me in an economics class. That they thought that this was a student, by the way, not the teacher, but yeah, the fact that they thought that this was appropriate shows that they clearly didn't learn anything about economics and just pretty much wanted to use it as a propaganda platform. Yay!
I still am kind of floored. I mean, Keynesianism being pushed as hard as it is in high school and the universities is one thing, but not even acknowledging modern supply and demand theory, that is just... I don't know how they get away with it.
Well, it's very simple. They ignore it completely. But anyways, let's continue.
They're the state, so they have a monopoly on education. That's how they get away with it.
Using too much stuff. Now, I know this can be hard to hear, but it's the truth, so we've got to deal with it.
It's definitely not.
Decades alone, 1/3 of the planet's natural resource base has been consumed.
Yeah, it's very misleading.
How do you possibly get to that? I mean, keep in mind that the deepest mine on Earth is, if I recall correctly, around 2 to 3 miles deep. And that's not even a mine, just a hole that people dug just to see if people could dig that far.
14 miles deep, actually. But yeah, what I was going to say is that it's not being explained whether or not these resources are being replenished. They're just talking about the amount that's been consumed, which presumably I've looked at the sources on the website that hosts this video, which you can do if you looked in the description of the YouTube channel. And yeah, based on the fact they're not taking into consideration total resources or substitution or any of these sort of basic concepts. I think that they're pulling one over on us. I don't know about you.
They definitely are. There's resource extraction at the kind of level she's talking about only occurs in a couple places on Earth, and that only represents the surface of the Earth. In terms of oceanic mining and resource extraction there, we've barely even, or we being civilization, has barely even scratched the surface, to say nothing of the fact that if we start to go deeper into the Earth, into the crust, we start to get access to more resources. And that's even before we get to the mantle, the outer core, and the inner core of the Earth, all of which are completely and totally untapped. As far as natural resources on Earth, we've barely begun to even scratch the surface, and we're already looking into things like asteroid mining, which completely undermines this argument that this idiot is trying to put to us. And this is being put forward in schools. What the
and on top of that, there are already like there are ceramics which are being found can conduct electricity, and people creating things like bionic mushrooms or flowers which can conduct electricity. Have you seen some of those things in the resources section of the Discord?
I have not, but I would not be surprised at all.
But and on top of that, yeah, a lot of these minerals are just we're getting to the point where we can just start synthesizing them in labs. Like it's been known for a decade, you can synthesize gold, not in an amount which can be viable in terms of industry, but the fact that that's possible shows that this argument is becoming less relevant as time goes by.
And of course, you also have things like you don't even have to do this in the lab. You can do this at home. You can grow moissanite crystals, which are slightly less hard as diamonds, but they're clearer and they reflect and refract light a lot better than diamonds do. In addition, can be used in all sorts of industrial applications that diamonds ordinarily could do. They're so cheap, you can actually, growing them is actually very cheap, requiring I think only a few $100s worth of investment, and there's all sorts of things you can do with it in addition to the possibilities of moissanite using to refract in optical computing, which could come about in the not too distant future. So yeah, there's all sorts of substitutions that people are going to create. You can literally grow better diamonds.
And graphene as well. There's which we can't, which is basically like a super substance, and that can just be created in the lab. Doesn't need any sort of resource extraction.
Yeah. And have you heard of starlight?
Yeah, I've heard that before. I think we talked about it early on.
Yeah, we were talking about that early on. Basically, some YouTuber heard it described and figured out that with Elmer's glue, baking powder, I'm trying to remember all this ingredients off the top of my head, he created basically a clay-like substance that had all of the properties that starlight was rumored to have. Starlight being some substance that was developed in the 50s or 60s if I recall correctly, and it could deflect heat in ways that no other material could. It was absolutely miraculous. However, before he could sell it, he ended up, passing away, and the material was lost forever.
Yeah, okay. He went to the patent office probably first, and that was his biggest mistake. Yeah, isn't it interesting how people who create all of these technologies, all of these new products, which would subvert a massive part of the current political economy, they submit their blueprints to the patent office, and then suddenly they die, or their blueprints are lost, and they don't do anything more with it.
Weird. Now, what's going on with the what's it called? With the starlight substitute that this YouTuber made and demonstrated on video? He made it using ingredients that don't cost more than $10 you can get at the grocery store. And keep in mind, like, this is heat shielding far superior to anything that currently exists, and you can make it with $10.
Yeah, it's like bootleg Death Note. Create a subversive product and then send it to the patent office. Claim that someone you don't like created it, and they'll wind up dead a couple days later.
Probably by they'll say he died of a heart attack, just like what the Death Note does, except that the heart attack somehow coerced him into shooting himself in the back of the head in a tragic weightlifting accident.
He had a heart attack, and during his heart attack, he had a muscle spasm, which caused him to shoot himself in the back of the head 5 times.
In a weightlifting accident. It was really tragic. Anyways, let's keep going.
Gone. We are cutting and mining and hauling and trashing the place so fast that we're undermining the planet's very ability for people to live here. Where I live in the United States, we have less than 4% of our original forests left.
That's absolute bullshit.
That is an absolute lie. There have been studies shown that we actually have more forests than in the colonial era. And even then, like, there wasn't, like, you could chalk that up actually to technological innovation, because things like, well, technological innovation strikes again, where things like wood preservatives have reduced the demand for wood and people don't need to cut it down as often. You also have things like use of development of petroleum products to heat people's homes, as well as charcoal to, well, again, heat people's homes. So people don't need to be cutting down trees just because they don't want to be cold in the winter. Like, the idea that we're running out of forests is absolutely insane. And the idea that we have 4% than we had left, 4%, when do we have, I'm sorry, but what time period is this 4% comparing it to? Because I don't think there's a time in North American history, forget about American history, where there were 96% more forests.
Yeah, and this is one of those things I don't even know why people believe it. I'm sure a lot of people do, but yeah, you can pretty easily, just through observation, you can prove this wrong. Most states in the U.S. have a major wooded area, whether it's a national park or it's a logging camp, or it's just, you know, a field which is privately owned of like tree farmers or hunting land. So
Hell, I mean, I remember I used to live in New England. Every Christmas around actually this time, we would drive over to the Christmas tree farm. It was literally a farm that grew Christmas trees. There were lots where you would physically chop them down. Well, they gave you a handsaw and you would saw it down, and then you would take it over, they would bundle it up, and you would drive it home. So, yeah, that's a thing. The idea that we're running out of forests when there are businesses that rely on growing forests is beyond insane.
40% of the waterways have become undrinkable.
Were they ever drinkable? I mean, any survivalist will tell you that. Okay, that wasn't supposed to happen. Any survivalist will tell you, yeah, don't drink river water, ever. So I don't know if there was ever a time period where waterways were drinkable.
yeah, define drinkable, because yeah, I mean, there's a reason why filters exist for just drinking river water.
It's just don't.
And our problem is not just that we're using too much stuff, but we're using more than our share. We have
Our share.
Again, laws of supply and demand and basic ideas of marginal utility and scarcity. Things which should be taught in government, in not gov. I don't know. Things that should be taught in basic economics, but apparently aren't in government economics.
Well, no, I mean, people actually learning this stuff for themselves and actually understanding it will completely undermine the state, which is why you got to give them just enough to invoke the Dunning-Kruger effect. You get them to know, but not any understanding.
We have 5% of the world's population, but we're using 30% of the world's resources and creating 30% of the world's waste. If everybody consumed at US rates, we would need 3 to 5 planets. And you know what?
Well, let's get 3 to 5 planets. I mean, I'm a futurist, so that sounds like a pretty good goal to attain to me.
Also, if that were true, how come there's anything left? If the U.S. I mean, this again, it's the same dishonest shit. They're not giving a time frame. They're not talking. They're not taking into consideration the rate at which these resources are replenished, or substitution, or any of the things you would need to take into consideration when making a claim like this. But yeah, like the fact that that's actually the way that they're representing the US's rate of consumption, and not taking into consideration the fact these resources are being replenished at a greater rate than they're being consumed. That should just, why does that not like occur to people? That shouldn't be possible. If that were the case, we'd all be dead already, because there wouldn't be any resources left on Earth.
But Esso, how do you know that we haven't just moved to a different Earth because we destroyed the last one?
Yeah, getting into that's what you'd have to do. You'd have to get into like that, the hollow earth territory of pseudoscience.
All right, let's keep going.
We've only got one. So my country's response to this limitation is simply to go take somebody else's. This is the third world, which some would say is another word for our stuff that somehow got on somebody else's land.
Where is this going? I know where this is going, but still.
I don't like where this is going. We should get that that JonTron clip. I mean,
What does that look like?
the thing is, this is another one of those points which, I mean, isn't necessarily wrong. It's not because of consumption, though. That's where she fucks it up. The reason why the U.S. government tends to engage in military aggression is obviously because it needs to sustain more resources for itself, being a government.
Mm-hmm. And ultimately, it comes down to socio-political causes rather than any economic or resources questions. Fact of the matter is, I can't think of very many wars that occurred on the basis of resource scarcity. I mean, I'm trying to think of any. People will point to the Iraq War, but that was over the petrodollar rather than petro.
I can't think of one either.
Let alone in the last, like, scarcity of land, scarcity of... I can't think of any. So...
The same thing. Trashing the place.
I got nothing.
75% of global fisheries now are fished at or beyond capacity. 80% of the planet's original forests are gone.
I don't know why you paused it again. We already refuted that point.
Yeah, well, this time she says 80% of the world's forests are gone, which is not true again. There are more forests now, especially in China for some reason, than there were even 100 years ago. So anyways.
In the Amazon alone, we're losing 2,000 trees a minute. That is 7 football fields a minute. And what about the people?
Oh my, you talked about that.
According to these guys, they don't own these resources, even if they've been living there for generations. They don't own the means of production, and they're not buying a lot of stuff. And in this system,
we gotta seize the means of production, comrade.
Well, no, they don't own the land. They don't own the means of production. The government does.
Yeah.
And the government makes deals with the United States government to, yeah, as long as you give us a kickback, you can have your companies come in and do whatever the hell they want. Oh, and by the way, your government is going to help protect them militarily and make sure that they have a monopoly.
But yeah, even just aside from the fact, there's not really, I was just about to say, there's not any such thing as community ownership or collective ownership. And that's obvious the moment that you start having disputes over how resources are used. There can't be anything that's public property, quote unquote, is owned by a sort of arbitring organization. in most cases, that's the state in today's society. But and they just simply let people use these resources. But another thing that I was going to say is, if they're suggesting, which I know they're going to later on, that the state should own these resources in third world countries. Well, as we've already pointed out, that is a big part of the reason why those areas of the world are so polluted.
It's weird. It's almost as if giving coercive monopoly the ability to dictate who owns what and move it wherever is going to cause all the problems that they're complaining about. But anyways,
Or buy a lot of stuff you don't have value. So next, the materials are moved to production. And what happens there is we use energy to mix toxic chemicals in with the natural resources to make toxic contaminated products. There are
you gotta love the well poisoning there. That we're just arbitrarily adding in toxic materials and toxic chemicals, even though you add that specifically to create certain products. You're mixing matter together.
By the way, what she's doing, rather ironically, is poisoning the well. Because
I just said that.
Well, what I was going to expand upon is that on the website this video is hosted on, the citation for this is a study which says that there are a bunch of chemicals in the environment, which, yeah, everything has chemicals in it. And she's taking that and saying they're all toxic. There's toxic stuff all around us because the word chemical is there and it's scary. No, your body produces chemicals. Everything has chemicals in it.
Everything is chemicals. You are chemicals. That's what matter is.
So
I don't know. I know why they're trying to be misleading about this, but I'm just trying to imagine like what alternative they would try to propose is, even under a system of complete and total like totalitarian dictatorship or some kind of communal ownership system. You're still going to be adding toxic chemicals in order to create useful products. There's no way you're going to be able to get around this.
Yeah,
unless you come up with some.
According to the standard which is being used, fucking water would be considered toxic.
Well, I mean, obviously, haven't you heard of what is it? Dihydrogen monoxide?
Poisoning, yeah.
Dihydrogen monoxide poisoning, aka drowning.
And somebody pointed out in the chat, this is Tide Pod's logic. You're not supposed to, even for the stuff that actually is toxic, it's known that you're not supposed to eat them. You're not supposed to eat the Tide Pods.
I think this lady needs to be informed that she shouldn't be eating her iPod Nano. Just a suggestion. Anyways,
over 100,000 synthetic chemicals in use in commerce today. Only a handful of them have even been tested for health impacts, and none.
This is the kind of shit that I'm talking about. They're toxic because they're chemicals.
Only a handful have been tested for safety. Yeah, because you don't need to test cyanide for safety. You're not supposed to eat iron, dumbass.
Also, what she's talking about is FDA testing, which the thing is, they are tested. It's just usually they're tested by private boards and like industry standards organizations.
You're not supposed to consume the things that like. Is she hungry? Is she just so hungry that she looks at
Oh my God,
pile of radioactive waste and just like her mouth starts watering?
I think she actually did eat her iPod. Look, it's gone.
Oh god. Oh no, this poor person.
I think
Have been tested for
that's
synergistic health impact.
that's starting to explain the quality of these arguments. I'll
They've been eating Tide Pods before that was even a thing. Honestly, people who are just this dumb probably deserve what happened to them. It's cruel, but I mean, we have Darwin Awards for a reason. It's to encourage people not to die in very stupid ways.
That means when they interact with all the other chemicals we're exposed to every day. So we don't know the full impact on health and the environment of all these toxic chemicals, but we do.
You're not gonna die because you drink fucking water.
I mean, she might.
I can't believe, yeah, because she'll face plant into like a 2-foot puddle of water and drown. But yeah, I can't believe that even needs to be said. That's the level of propaganda we're at and have been at for 10 years now. It's crazy.
Toxics in, toxics out. As long as we keep putting toxics into our industrial production systems, we're going to keep getting toxics in the stuff that we bring into our homes and workplaces and schools and our bodies.
What do you say to that? Toxins in, toxics out. Well, yeah, let's just not put toxins in there. See what happens.
Yeah, you can tell just like by a rule of thumb when you're being fed a load of bullshit because they tend to. The people who are presenting the bullshit arguments, they tend to not be as specific as they can possibly get away with. They tend to generalize quite a bit, and this would be a great example of that. Not contextualizing their terms, not explaining themselves, being overly general to the point where it's barely coherent what they're even talking about.
And
This is just a picture perfect example of propaganda, I'd say.
I remember actually I saw a response to another one of this group's videos called "The Story of Makeup," I think, and the point that they made is that there are more toxic chemicals in a stick of lipstick than there are in a candy bar.
Yeah, I'd say that's about right.
You're supposed to eat the candy bar. You're not supposed to eat lipstick. What do you do? What do you say to that?
I mean, I guess it's pretty straightforward. I don't know what to say to that.
You're not supposed to eat most of this stuff. And the stuff that you are supposed to eat, yeah, you're gonna find stuff that actually is unsafe to consume if you look for it. But you're talking about trace amounts. Like 0.0000002%. Anyways.
Brominated flame retardants, they're a chemical that make things more fireproof, but they are super toxic. They're a neurotoxin. That means toxic to the brain. What are we even doing using a chemical like this? Yet we put it in our computers, our appliances, couches, mattresses, even some pillows.
You're not supposed to. You're not supposed to eat those things.
Douse them in a neuro.
Oh my god. Also, most of it is in the packaging, not the actual product. So yeah, don't eat the packaging either.
You're not supposed to eat.
You're not supposed to eat computers.
I can't. This is dumber than I remember. You're not supposed to eat a pillow. I am genuinely concerned for the health of these people. If this is the target audience if the audience is so dumb that they need to be told not to eat their computers or their pillows, I don't think we can help them. Although consider what the alternative is. That if we don't put those flame retardants into the pillows, that means that there is a higher risk of them catching fire. I mean, the tiny non-existent risk of being affected by possibly a neurotoxin versus, the more likely possibility of being caught on fire in your sleep. I mean, you'll have to make that judgment for yourself, but yeah, it's a question of trade-offs and risk. Well, how much risk are you willing to accept? Ultimately, it's not a question that I could possibly answer, but I think considering the fact that the use of these materials, which are almost certainly going to be required to be in there by government restrictions.
Yeah,
Well,
consume the means of production, comrade.
literally consume the means of production. Devour the means of production.
I'm loving the chat right now. It's the best chat I think we've ever had.
I can't. I haven't. I need to tab over to see this. Only under real Marxism will every means of production be 100% edible. Oh my god, this is fantastic. Anyways, that's not good.
Toxin. Do we bring them home and put our heads on them for 8 hours a night to sleep? I don't know, but it seems to me in this country with so much potential, we could think of a better way to stop our heads from catching on fire at night. Now, these toxics build up the food chain and concentrate in our bodies. Do you know what is the food at the top of the food chain with the highest level of many toxic contaminants? Human breast milk. That means that we've reached a point.
Do I even need to comment on that? Big part of why, I'd say it's kind of the opposite. Big part of the reason why people end up becoming fucking autistic is because they aren't given fucking breast milk.
Or it's a possibility that autism is overdiagnosed because you have doctors who have a direct material. Well, they get money from. They get kickbacks from the pharmaceuticals.
No, a lot of these synthetic formulas, they do have chemicals which can be associated with stunted brain development. So there is actually a causal relationship there.
Fair enough.
Point where the smallest members of our societies, our babies, are getting the highest lifetime dose of toxic chemicals from breastfeeding from their mothers. Is that not an incredible violation?
Breast milk has chemicals in it, therefore people are being poisoned by breastfeeding. Buy our synthetic formulas and make your children autistic, kids.
So here's a good trade-off. Would you rather have natural breast milk, to which humans have evolved to consume for hundreds of thousands of years, or would you rather get a synthetic blend that may or may not have the toxins in, toxics out problem that she was talking about earlier? What's it going to be? I mean, is your kid just not going to drink milk? I mean, you could do that, but I think you'll have to do some research on what the health benefits and problems of that are going to be. It's going to be a question of value, which ultimately we can't answer, but yeah, do your own research on that. But I'm fairly certain that... What?
We just got a big-ass super chat.
Ooh. Ooga Booga for $50. Wow, thank you. Yeah, he just says, like, I just caught the stream, what's up? Yeah, we're doing a commentary on the story of Stuff. We're an hour and 10 minutes into the stream, but we're only like 6 minutes and 27 seconds into it.
Are we gonna finish the whole video? Because I don't know if we are.
We're definitely not. I think what we should do is we should go to I don't know, another 20 minutes. 20 minutes into the stream, and then we'll try to finish the video on another future stream. But yeah, thank you so much for the super chat.
Yeah. Anyways, let's keep the video. Insurgent says, I don't know. What do you think about that? You don't?
I don't think that's realistic, but we can attempt it.
All right, sure.
All right, let's go.
Breastfeeding must be the most fundamental human act of nurturing. It should be sacred and safe. Now, breastfeeding is still best, and mothers should
Sacred.
definitely keep.
I don't know. I just wanted to comment about that phrasing.
It's meant to be an emotional appeal.
Yeah.
Probably meant to go after go after the feelings of people who are otherwise not logically inclined to be able to analyze this thing objectively. Like, oh, breastfeeding is sacred, but look at all the chemicals that are being pumped into it.
Albedo says in chat, back in my day, babies died from malaria. When were you born? Like 1850?
Probably. Anyways.
Breastfeeding, but we should protect it. They should protect it. I thought they were looking out for us. And of
No, they're not.
course, the people who bear the biggest brunt of these toxic chemicals are the factory workers, many of whom are women of reproductive age. They're working with reproductive toxins, carcinogens, and more.
No, in fact,
Now I ask you,
even if a lot of this were true, you're talking about the political economy, i.e., the area of the market which exists and is created by the state, essentially, and is influenced by the state's legislative fiat. So even if this were true, no, they're clearly not looking out for you because they kind of engineered this whole situation.
The only reason that they need to be on the line at all is simply because their jobs have not been automated away. And of course, we know exactly what's going to happen when they no longer need to work because their jobs have been automated away. Oh no, you're preventing people from being able to get jobs. You're losing their jobs. And basically they're going to invoke the Luddite fallacy that them losing their jobs to automation is a bad thing, but also them having the jobs and them being exposed to these toxic chemicals is also a bad thing. I mean, you can't win with these people.
No, you can't. I mean, it's just peak intellectual dishonesty.
Pretty much.
what kind of woman of reproductive age would work in a job exposed to reproductive toxins except for a woman with no other option? And that's
the kind of woman who works in a political economy where this kind of thing is absolutely required because the government has made it so difficult to be work independently or to get a husband who could otherwise work, that this kind of thing is required in order to maintain even their lifestyle. So ultimately, it's still the government's fault.
A study put out by the University of North Carolina showed that without taxation, the average income in the United States would be like $330,000. I mean, that is just... Most people could be self-employed if they had that much money.
It'd be very easy for people to retire on that kind of money. Hell, I mean, people could probably still earn the kind of incomes they have now, but they could afford to work like 10 hours a week or something. I thought that would be something that Marxists and just generally that they would want, but apparently not.
That's one of the beauties of this system. The erosion of local environments and economies here ensures a constant supply of people with no other option. Globally, 200,000 people a day are moving from environments that have sustained them for generations into cities, many to live in slums, looking for work, no matter how toxic that work may be.
I love what they're trying to do here with the what's the name of that fallacy? The one where they try to idealize the state of nature and try to lament.
Oh God! Appeal to tradition.
It's an appeal to tradition, yeah. That somehow people lived better in the state of nature than they did now, even though we have tremendous anthropological evidence of primitive societies that show that they were actually very much in a Hobbesian state of nature, where life was short, brutish, and nasty. You had homicide rates in upwards of 20%. You had infanticide rates in the 50%. It was just generally insane. Not to mention that people typically died of getting a cut and they died of an infection.
Yeah, and something that I was going to add to this as well is that most, like, even in this scenario, most of the time people making this argument and idealizing the sort of rural farm life that existed in feudalism, like, they never really question why it is that people in the first world moved into the cities in the first place. People weren't there weren't other governments engaging in imperial aggression against them.
Hell, this happened in the United States. I mean, during the Industrial Revolution, you had something like roughly 90%, if I recall correctly, of the workforce living in farms, and towards the beginning of the 19th century, or not 19th, 20th century, it was like down to 5%, if I recall correctly, roughly around that ballpark. But yeah, there was no foreign aggression to the United States as far as I'm concerned. The Civil War was largely largely in the rear view, and sure, we were moving towards World War One. But by the time World War One came around, the farmlands had largely been well consolidated along a small number of larger producers because new technology existed that allowed them to utilize greater quantities of farmland where previously that would not be possible. So, no, the agricultural, the agrarian idol is just, it's absolutely absurd. And the idea that this is somehow causing harm to them, I mean, ultimately that's going to be a question of judgment for one way or another, but the fact that I don't think there's very much to say about that. It's just blatantly false. It's clearly propaganda.
Looks like we got another super chat.
Oh boy. Ooga Booga says, I gotta go back to work. See you guys later. Well, well, thank you very much for the $20. And yeah, the stream will be on my channel, Filthy Heretic. So if you want to see what we talked about there, yeah, that's where it'll be.
I'm pretty sure he's just donating to hear you say Ooga Booga.
Ooga Booga. Well, it works. Anyways, let's go back to it. The thing's stuttering. There it goes.
Not just resources that are wasted along this system, but people too. Whole communities get wasted. Yep, toxics in, toxics out. A lot of the toxics leave the factories in products, but even more leave as byproducts of pollution. And it's a lot of pollution. In the US, our industry admits to releasing over 4 billion pounds of toxic chemicals a year.
Again,
4 billion pounds of, wait a minute. So you're saying that it releases 4 billion pounds of chemicals that can be used in for industry?
No, they're talking about byproducts. And again, this is an example, again, of using equivocation. Chemicals are toxic. All chemicals are toxic because some chemicals are toxic.
Isn't like the most common industrial byproduct water vapor?
Yeah.
Well, I guess
the chemical.
I guess dihydrogen monoxide is a toxic chemical. And I like what someone said in the comments earlier that 100% of everyone who has consumed dihydrogen monoxide has died ever. It truly is the most toxic chemical. But, I mean, this shows what I was saying in my pollution video, that technological innovation ultimately allows for more efficient production, which will eventually reduce the need for pollution entirely. Industrial byproducts are simply industrial products that have not been economized yet. But this could eventually be solved at some point in the future.
Probably a lot more, because that's only what they admit. So that's another limit, because yuck, who wants to look at and smell 4 billion pounds of toxic chemicals a year? So what do? Move the dirty factories overseas, pollute someone else's land. But
That's definitely not why outsourcing exists. Outsourcing exists because there's so much artificial scarcity created by the state in terms of labor costs and labor in terms of industrial requirements in the United States that make production in the United States so freaking expensive that in order to be profitable at all, they have to interact with foreign governments, comply with their restrictions, comply with their taxes, get make deals with shipping companies to move products thousands of miles over oceans or over the air. That somehow that entire expansion of the supply chain unnecessarily is still cheaper than producing in the United States. It has nothing to do with wanting to move production or wanting to not pollute domestically.
Yeah, this is another pretty basic concept, which should be taught, but unfortunately isn't, because it would interfere with a lot of these cases for protectionism. The law of comparative advantage, as proposed by David Ricardo. In other words, the market eventually reaches a new equilibrium, and lower wages mean that people could be employed to compete for work in a lot of these places, which means more resources are produced in an actual free market, and therefore there are more resources employers and producers have to use for their production.
Very much so. Now let's keep going.
surprise, a lot of that pollution is coming right back at us, carried by wind currents. So, what happens after all these natural resources are turned into products? Well, it moves here for distribution. Now, distribution means selling all the toxic contaminated junk as quickly as possible. The goal here is to keep the prices down, keep the people buying, and keep the inventory moving. How do they keep the prices down? Well, they don't pay the store workers very much, and they skimp on health insurance every time they can. It's all
That's not at all how they keep the prices down. I mean, I know that they're clearly using the example of Walmart. I mean, it's blatantly obvious. Though Walmart is one of the most heavily subsidized companies in the United States, beaten out only by Boeing. And the kind of tax advantages that they get for opening a store in a certain municipality, the kind of direct subsidies, the kind of bonus ease of transport, or the kind of bonuses that they get from the U.S. Postal Service for shipping their freight allows them to keep prices at such a significantly lower than other domestic retailers or other retailers in the area.
And as I pointed out, welfare for people with low incomes also creates a disincentive associated with evaluating the marginal product of each individual worker. Well, not necessarily a disincentive, but it mitigates that cost they'd otherwise have to take into consideration.
Mm-hmm. To say nothing of the fact that, well, you try to characterize it as characterize what they're being paid as a low wage. How do you make that determination? Is it just because you perceive it to be a low wage, or is it just because that's just something you want to do? Obviously, this is a wage that they find acceptable because otherwise they wouldn't be employed in the first place. Now, you can say that there is a scarcity of jobs, but again, you can just point to the state being a cause of it entirely.
Yeah, somebody pointed out in the chat that Walmart gets more in subsidies than they make in revenue just so that they can break even. If you could provide a source to that, that'd be great. Last I checked, in direct subsidies, in terms of what the government actually gave Walmart, it was 1/4 of their revenue in the United States. So,
suffice to say that in the absence of the state, let alone the state providing subsidies, these giant corporations that people are legitimately concerned about and have a good reason to be, they wouldn't exist. So, yeah. Anyways, let's keep going.
all about externalizing the costs. What that means is that the real costs of making stuff aren't captured in the price. In other words, we aren't paying for the stuff we buy. I was thinking about this the other day. I was walking to work and I wanted to listen to the news, so I popped into a Radio Shack to buy a radio. I found this cute little green radio for $4.99. I was standing there in line to buy this thing, and I was thinking, how could $4.99 possibly capture the cost of making this radio and getting it into my hands?
Well, if you were
not that expensive to make, even for 2009, it would have been very cheap to make a Walkman. Nowadays, you could find them at the dollar store.
And of course, like now, the reason that's going to be cheap is because again, like a whole bunch of companies are going to be receiving a bunch of government subsidies. Now, if she wanted to make a case, I know where this is going, and she's going to want to make a case about externalized costs, which is going to be accurate because these subsidies have to be paid somehow, and these costs are going to be burdened onto the state, which in turn is burdening it onto taxpayers. So the costs of these cheap products is distributed throughout the whole society by force against its will. Not that the society has a will, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, and then the thing somebody just pointed out is that this is unironically a labor theory of value argument.
Which is pretty accurate because, well, these people are Marxists. George Soros tends to attract these kinds of people and hires these people. So it makes sense that they would make that argument.
The labor theory of value is pretty accurate. Filthy Heretic 2019.
Okay, then. But anyways...
I'm just joking.
Yeah, so anyways...
The metal was probably mined in South Africa. The petroleum was probably drilled in Iraq. The plastics were probably produced in China. And maybe the whole thing was assembled by some 15-year-old in a maquiladora in Mexico.
Isn't this beautiful? I mean, what you have is a whole bunch of people in a supply chain that is distributed throughout the world, all coming together to produce a single product. Isn't that amazing? That's world peace. That's the kind of thing that we should all be happy and excited for. That's a mark in favor of what she's trying to criticize rather than, a criticism against it.
Yeah, even despite the existence of all these trade cartels like the World Trade Organization or the IMF. Yeah, and despite how some of these countries have complete government control over a lot of these industries, yeah, that still is the case.
She basically just repeated the I pencil essay and tried to use it as a criticism when it just doesn't work. But anyways, we are at the 1 hour 30 minute mark, so we should probably wrap this up.
Yeah, that sounds good. We'll remember where we're at. 9 minutes and 18 seconds.
I got 9:16, but yeah, around that area.
So I guess next time we stream, we'll be doing more of this, or at the very least, the rest of this.
Yeah, we'll try to. I don't know if we can finish this, but we'll definitely do doing more of it. So, anyways, yeah, thank you for stopping by, and we'll see you next time. Bye.